The Dark Scrolls. What if beauty was a sentence? What if desire, instead of opening doors, closed them shut forever behind you? In the grandeur of ancient Rome, where marble arches met golden domes and emperors dined beneath painted ceilings, there existed a class of people rarely named, never honored, and always consumed. They were young, they were alluring, they were not free. This is not the story of soldiers, senators, or kings. This is the story of the ones who lay in silk, smiled on command, and lived in cages lined with perfume. They were called concubini, male concubines. Not slaves, but not citizens. Not prisoners, but not guests. Not lovers, but not strangers. They were something in between. Owned affection, decorative submission, ornamental sacrifice. Rome was a city of masks. Behind every statue of a stoic man holding a sword stood an invisible chorus of bodies who had served, suffered, and disappeared. And for every war won, for every law written, there was also a private chamber, a curtained bed, and someone like Cassian. Cassian wasn't born to seduce. He was born to run vineyards. His father grew grapes outside of Capua, taught him how to taste the soil in the fruit, how to listen to the wind to know if storms were coming. But that world ended the day a Roman governor passed through their town, stopped at their villa, and caught a glimpse of a boy with eyes like burnished gold. He said nothing. The next morning, Cassian was gone. He was brought to a domus on the Aventine Hill, a vast, silent palace with echoing halls, where his name was whispered like a secret and his future carved without consent. The master of the house, Lucius Varro, was a man of immense wealth, considerable charm, and unquenchable appetite for power, for beauty, and for the illusion of control. Cassian was bathed in rosewater, perfumed, clothed in imported silks, and taught the arts not of survival, but of presentation. He learned how to walk as though floating, how to smile without revealing opinion, how to listen with rapt attention and speak only when silence grew awkward. He was not beaten. He was not locked away. No, he was pampered, and that in a way was far more terrifying. He was fed sweet figs and chilled wine, while older men debated politics in the next room. He was summoned during feasts to grace the conversation. He was asked to play the lyre, not for his skill, but because the movement of his fingers drew glances. He became a painting come to life. Every glance, every laugh, every compliment carved away a piece of him. At night, he slept on cushions finer than any he'd ever seen. Yet he woke hollow, because in all the softness there was no safety. The smiles that met him were rehearsed. The hands that touched him did not ask. The words whispered into his ear reeked of honey and ownership. Lucius never called him by name. He used pet names: my flame, my swan, my silken treasure. Each one, though sweet, erased him a little more. To the world, Cassian had become a role, a position, an accessory. And to the other men at the table, senators, generals, poets, he was a measure of Lucius's prestige. This boy, Lucius would boast, fingers lightly touching Cassian's shoulder, was hand-picked from the hills of Campania. See the color of his eyes, like the dying sun over the Tiber. They would nod, they would envy, and they would look at Cassian the way one looks at a rare vase, gorgeous, fragile, and not quite human. In private moments, Lucius could be gentle. He read poems aloud. He kissed Cassian's wrists. He claimed to love. And Cassian, desperate for some anchor in the whirlwind of performance, sometimes pretended to believe it. Because what choice did he have? But love that cannot be refused is not love. It's a transaction with prettier words. There were others in the house, older boys who now served wine, former favorites. They rarely spoke, but their eyes told stories of nights too long, of affection turned cold, of becoming invisible once the next beauty arrived. One, named Sylvanus, had once worn the same color robes as Cassian. Now he limped when he walked, carried a tray of fruit, and avoided mirrors. "You're lucky," he said to Cassian once, in a voice like dried leaves. "Lucius actually thinks you're special. That'll last longer. Not forever, but longer." Cassian didn't know whether to feel relieved or doomed. There were rumors, of course. Whispers of Concubine who had risen in favor, granted properties, even freed and married off. But those were tales told by drunk scribes and bored noblewomen. The truth was simpler, colder. Boys like Cassian were meant to adorn Rome, not shape it. The city accepted them, but never respected them. A man could take a male lover without scandal, so long as that lover was beneath him in status, both socially and sexually. To be penetrated, both literally and metaphorically, was to be seen as lesser. The concubine embodied that role fully, and so became simultaneously desired and despised. The contradiction was dizzying. By his 17th birthday, Cassian had become more myth than man. At banquets, people told stories about his laugh. Artists sketched him from memory. He was the model for a fresco in a senator's bathhouse, though he never agreed to it. His body no longer belonged to him. It belonged to the empire's elite imagination. And yet he was still a boy who remembered the smell of grapevines and the sound of his father's boots on packed earth. Somewhere beneath the silk was a heartbeat that wanted more than applause. Then came the day everything shifted. A new guest arrived, Gaius, a military tribune from the frontier. Scarred, sunburned, blunt in speech. He looked at Cassian not with hunger, but with confusion, as if unsure whether he was meeting a person or a performance. "You're not smiling," Gaius said after dinner one night. Cassian blinked. "Should I be?" "I don't know. Should you?" It was the first time in years someone had asked him a real question. That night, Cassian didn't sleep. He sat by the window, looking out at Rome's lights flickering like dying stars, and wondered what it would take to become real again. Cassian began to notice how often he was watched. In the weeks following Gaius's visit, something shifted. Cassian still sat at Lucius's side during dinners, still poured wine with steady hands, and knelt beside musicians when the mood demanded poetry. But he no longer felt fully inside his own body. Every movement, every gesture began to feel like acting. And the more he watched himself, the more he realized he had been performing long before he ever knew what a role was. The house seemed to pulse with scrutiny. Lucius had not said anything, but Cassian could feel it in the way he lingered after touching him, in the way servants lowered their voices when he entered the atrium. Even the older concubines began to look at him differently, not with pity, but with warning. And Gaius had not returned. He missed Gaius. That was the strangest part of all. He missed not the man himself, but the feeling. The way Gaius had seen him without expectation. Not as Lucius's favorite, not as the boy with the honeyed voice or the perfect cheekbones, just as someone who wasn't smiling. That alone had meant more than all the gold-threaded compliments Cassian had ever received. It was during one of the midday rituals that Cassian truly understood how far he had drifted from himself. Lucius had gathered a small group of poets and actors to honor Bacchus with a private ceremony in the garden. There was wine, lyres, flower wreaths, and, inevitably, Cassian. He was dressed in a sheer violet robe and asked to lead a dance, something slow and reverent, a tribute to beauty itself. He moved the way he'd been taught. He smiled as if intoxicated with ecstasy and sunlight, But somewhere between one turn and the next, his eyes caught on the statue of Bacchus towering above the vines, and he froze, just for a moment. It was nothing, a breath, but Lucius saw. After the guests left, Lucius approached him in the peristyle garden. The air was warm and damp, the sky a pale silver gray. "You hesitated," Lucius said softly. Cassian lowered his head. "I tripped." "No, you remembered something. That's more dangerous." Cassian looked up then, startled. "What?" Lucius touched his cheek as if brushing away an invisible blemish. "You were somewhere else, Cassian. Don't lie to me. I can tell when you're trying to leave." His voice wasn't angry. It was worse. It was hurt. Cassian stepped back, not far, just enough. "I wasn't trying to leave." "You don't have to." Lucius smiled. "Boys like you never do. Rome doesn't let you." Cassian said nothing. And in that silence, something else passed between them. Not affection, not threat. It was acknowledgement. Lucius, for all his luxury and privilege, understood exactly what Cassian had become and how impossible it was to escape it. That night, Cassian wandered the villa long after everyone else had retired. He passed the atrium, the triclinium, the private baths. He found himself outside the slaves' quarters, places he usually avoided. A young servant named Lysa, barely older than him, offered him bread and cheese without speaking. They sat together in the shadows, not as master and servant, but as two people who knew they were both expendable. "I used to think being beautiful was enough," Cassian whispered. Lysa tilted her head. "Enough for what?" "To matter." Lysa didn't answer. She just handed him a fig, overripe and sticky, and let the silence wrap around them. Days passed. Gaius returned. His visit was official, some minor military matter, but Lucius invited him to dine regardless. That evening, Cassian dressed more modestly, in plain white linen, and remained unusually quiet. Gaius noticed. After the meal, as the others lingered over honeyed dates and wine, Gaius pulled Cassian aside near the colonnade. The moonlight painted their faces in soft gray. "You look tired," Gaius said. "I am, Yao," Cassian replied. Gaius looked around, then lowered his voice. "I heard you once tried to leave." Cassian blinked. "Who told you that?" "An older servant said you made it to the gate once, then turned back." Cassian exhaled slowly. "It wasn't courage that made me return. It was knowing there was nowhere to go. There's always somewhere." "No," Cassian said, shaking his head. "There's just a different version of the same cage. Some are made of marble, some of dirt." Gaius frowned. "Then why smile at all?" Cassian turned to him, eyes suddenly sharp. "Because smiling buys time. Every moment I don't break, I steal back a little piece of myself." For a long moment, Gaius said nothing. Then he reached into the folds of his tunic and handed Cassian something small and cold, a bronze coin. It was scratched, battered, nearly worthless. "If you ever find a gate again," Gaius said, "give this to the man there. He's my uncle. He won't ask questions." Cassian closed his hand around the coin. His chest ached. He didn't know if it was hope or dread. Later that night, he stood by the mirror in his chamber, studying himself under the lamplight. His features hadn't changed. He was still beautiful, still perfect, still exactly what Lucius in Rome wanted him to be. But his eyes were different now. He wasn't smiling, and the mirror didn't lie. The following week, a new concubiness arrived, 14, nervous with soft curls and skin like milk. Lucius introduced him at a small gathering as a gift from a senator in Hispania. Everyone laughed. Everyone looked at Cassian. He knew what that meant. The curtain had begun to fall. The boy's name was Neron. He spoke little Latin, wore his fear like a cloak and followed Cassian around the villa like a shadow. Everything Cassian once was, the trembling uncertainty, the stunned awe, the desperate desire to be liked, now lived in Neron's eyes. Cassian hated how familiar it felt. He watched Lucius stroke the boy's hair during breakfast, watched senators whisper to one another, smiling the way men do when they see a new toy arrive at market. Cassian no longer drew glances, no longer poured wine. His presence became decorative in a different way, like a tapestry kept out of habit, not admiration. He was 17, and already his expiration date had passed. It was ironic. In a city obsessed with statues and legacy, no one knew how to hold on to what was truly human. One evening, Neron knocked on Cassian's door. His eyes were red. "Lucius asked me to wear perfume," he said. "I don't want to, but I said yes." Cassian said nothing. He simply stood, pulled a jar from his shelf, and opened it. Inside, thick, amber-scented oil. He dipped his fingers in, then gently pressed it to Neron's neck. "You wear it for survival," Cassian whispered. "Not for them." Neron blinked. "Does it ever stop feeling like pretending?" "No," Cassian said, "but sometimes pretending keeps you alive long enough to remember who you are." That night, Cassian walked the halls barefoot. The coin from Gaius was still hidden under his mattress, cool and waiting. Outside, the Tiber murmured in the distance. Every sound of the city was a temptation. He reached the garden where he'd once danced for Bacchus, where he'd once frozen beneath the statue's gaze. Now, under moonlight, it looked like a graveyard of illusions. The same vines curled upward, the same marble shone. But Cassian was no longer the boy in violet robes. He was someone else. He walked past Lucius's chamber. The door was ajar. Candlelight flickered. Inside, he saw Lucius sitting by the fire, alone. His back was hunched. A cup of wine rested in one hand. He looked older, tired in a way Cassian had never seen before. Lucius turned slowly. "Come in if you're going to stare." Cassian stepped inside. "I wasn't sure if I'd ever see you like this." "Like what?" "Unwatched, human." Lucius chuckled, bitter. "And what are you now, Cassian? Philosopher? Ghost?" "I'm just someone you used to own," Cassian replied. Lucius sighed. "I never owned you. You wanted to be here." "No," Cassian said, voice calm. "I wanted to be safe." "That's different." Lucius looked at him, really looked, and for the first time said nothing. He didn't deny it, didn't plead, just raised the cup and drank. Cassian left before sunrise. He didn't pack. He didn't say goodbye. He slipped through the servant gate, wrapped in a traveler's cloak stolen from the laundry room. The coin burned against his palm. Rome was still sleeping when he crossed the Aventine. Mist clung to the streets. Every statue seemed to turn its gaze as he passed. At the edge of the city, a man stood beside a mule cart, smoking something pungent from a clay pipe. He was old, scarred, and didn't flinch when Cassian approached. Cassian held out the coin. The man looked at it, then at Cassian. "You Gaius's problem?" Cassian hesitated. "I'm someone he tried to save." Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more.